All right, let's dive into one of the wildest stories in all of tech. How a tiny software company, basically started because of a magazine article, ended up running the entire personal computer revolution. It is an incredible story of genius, some ruthless strategy, and one deal that literally changed history.
And the whole thing, really, it all comes down to this one incredible moment. Imagine this. It's 1980. The Goliath of the tech world, IBM, needs a little bit of help. They go to this small, practically unknown company for a piece of software. And in doing that, they accidentally create the very monster that would one day challenge their throne.
But you know that IBM deal didn't just pop out of nowhere. To really get how it all happened, we've got to rewind the clock about 5 years, back to the very beginning, where a couple of young guys saw a future that pretty much nobody else could.
So picture this. It's 1975. Two buddies, Bill Gates and Paul Allen, are flipping through a magazine, and they see this thing, the Altair 8800. It's one of the very first personal computers, and they just knew these new little boxes would need software. So they did something incredibly bold. They called the company that made the Altair and promised them a programming language that they hadn't even written yet. Talk about a gamble, right? Well, it paid off, and Microsoft was born.
And right from day one, they made this one decision that was, honestly, a total masterstroke. While everyone else was scrambling to build the actual computer hardware, Gates and Allen decided that Microsoft would only make the software, the brains that made the machines run. It was like deciding not to build the cars, but to build the engine that every car company would need. That choice, man, that was the key to everything.
So, that whole software-first idea? Well, that's what perfectly positioned them for what came next. The pivotal moment we talked about at the start. The deal with IBM. And folks, this wasn't just any contract. This was, without a doubt, the deal of the century.
Okay, so check this out. Here's how it all went down. IBM is scrambling. They're building a new PC, and they need an operating system like yesterday. Microsoft, they don't actually have one. So what do? They quickly buy a simple OS from another company, rebrand it as MS-DOS, and take it to IBM. But here is the absolute genius move. They didn't sell it to IBM, they licensed it. And the magic words in the contract were non-exclusive. Why does that matter? Because it meant that when all the other companies inevitably copied IBM's PC, Microsoft was free to sell the exact same operating system to every single one of them. You see what they did there? By licensing MS-DOS to everyone, they didn't just win one big customer. No. They captured the entire market. They made their software the default standard for pretty much every PC on the planet. It was an absolute checkmate move. Game over. But here's the thing about MS-DOS. Let's be honest, it was a pain to use. It was all text and weird commands. So the next big battle wasn't about power. It was about making computers, well, usable for normal people. And that's where Windows storms onto the scene.
I mean, just look at the difference here. On one side, you have that classic, kind of scary black screen with the blinking cursor. You had to know the secret language to get anything done. And then, bam, you have Windows. You just point your mouse and click on a little picture. That's it. This wasn't just a step up. It was a total revolution in making computers approachable for everybody.
Now, after a few earlier versions, they hit the jackpot with Windows 95. This thing was a complete game changer. It wasn't just an update, it was a cultural event. This is where we got the iconic Start menu and the taskbar. It made plugging in a new printer suddenly easy. And they launched it with this insane marketing blitz, set to a Rolling Stones song. It was absolutely everywhere.
And the result? Oh boy, 7 million copies sold in just the first 5 weeks. For the time, that was just a mind-blowing number. It was official. The PC revolution had its king, and its name was Windows. Microsoft's dominance was now complete.
Okay, but as you can imagine, when you build an empire that big, that fast, people start to notice. And not always in a good way. The story takes a turn here, because with all that power came a whole lot of scrutiny.
See, Microsoft was smart. They knew the operating system was just the foundation, so they started building the rest of the house. They took Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, bundled them together as Microsoft Office, and boom, every business on Earth was using it. They created the tools that meant if you were building new software, you were building it for Windows. They were basically building walls around their kingdom, making it really hard for anyone to leave. This whole aggressive strategy really came to a head with the rise of the internet. Back then, the king of the web was a browser called Netscape Navigator. Microsoft saw this as a huge threat.
So they built Internet Explorer, and then they made their killer move. They bundled it for free with every single copy of Windows. The result? It was a bloodbath. Netscape's market share just evaporated. It was brutal.
Yeah, well, that move with Internet Explorer, that was the one that finally got the government's attention. In 1998, the U.S. Department of Justice came knocking, and they hit Microsoft with a massive lawsuit. The accusation was simple. Microsoft was a monopoly, and it was illegally using that power to destroy any company that got in its way. This was a legal showdown of epic proportions.
And all of this brings us right to the turn of the millennium, the year 2000. And the massive empire that Microsoft had built now found itself at a critical crossroads.
Just take a look at the scoreboard in the year 2000. PC operating systems, a near total monopoly. Office software, the universal standard, period. Software developers, you built for Windows or you pretty much didn't exist. And its founder, Bill Gates, was the richest man in the world. By every single metric you can think of, they had won.
And right at that absolute peak, that's when a major chapter closed. In January of 2000, Bill Gates himself stepped down as CEO. He handed the keys to the kingdom over to his longtime colleague, Steve Ballmer, to lead the company into the new century.
So that leaves us with this big question, right? There was no doubt about it. Microsoft had conquered the personal computer. But a new, even bigger war was just beginning, the war for the internet. And the question on everyone's mind was, could this empire, built for the age of the PC, possibly win all over again?
You know, between the years 2000 and 2014, Microsoft was basically living a double life. Seriously. On one hand, you had this unstoppable titan just churning out some of the most successful products in history. But on the other hand, you had this lumbering giant that was somehow missing every single major new trend. This is the story of that massive contradiction, the wild, turbulent era that, believe it or not, set the stage for the Microsoft we know today. It's a story of how a company could be a genius and a total fool all at the same time. And that right there, that's the central puzzle, isn't it? We're talking about the company that built the operating system for pretty much the entire world, and then, just for fun, decided to launch a legendary gaming console from scratch. So how on earth did that same company get completely blindsided by smartphones, by modern web search, by social media? That's the big question we're going to unpack right now. Okay, so let's set the scene. The year is 2000. Microsoft is just coming out of this bruising, super high-profile antitrust battle. I mean, the government is breathing down its neck. And right in the middle of all that chaos, a massive leadership change is about to go down. Bill Gates steps down as CEO and his right-hand man, Steve Ballmer, takes over. Now just imagine taking the wheel of the world's biggest tech company while regulators are watching your every single move. It was a total pressure cooker environment. But even with all that going on, Microsoft was about to release a product that would completely define the decade. And this brings us to the first part of our story, what I like to call the fortress. Because, look, while Microsoft might have had some serious blind spots in the markets it already controlled, it was an absolute juggernaut. It built these walls so high that nobody could even touch it. And that defining product was, of course, Windows XP. This thing wasn't just an update, it was a supernova. When it came out in 2001, it stabilized the whole company and basically became the default computing experience for hundreds of millions of people all around the globe. XP was so much more than just the thing that ran our PCs. It brilliantly combined a friendly design for regular folks with the rock-solid stability that businesses desperately needed. It became a global symbol of reliability, and that success let Microsoft dig its heels even deeper into the corporate world, with powerful tools like Windows Server and its .NET platform pretty much becoming the backbone of corporate IT. So as if completely dominating the PC world wasn't enough, Microsoft then made one of the boldest, riskiest bets in its entire history. It decided to jump headfirst into the brutal, cutthroat world of video game consoles, a market totally owned by Japanese giants Sony and Nintendo. Honestly, most people thought they were completely out of their minds.
But wow, did that gamble pay off. The original Xbox launched in 2001 with its killer app Halo. A year later, Xbox Live came along and just completely changed the game for online multiplayer. And by 2005, the Xbox 360 wasn't just a console anymore, it was a cultural phenomenon. Microsoft had literally built a brand new, incredibly powerful consumer ecosystem from absolutely nothing.
So, the fortress was secure, right? Windows and Xbox were these massive, undeniable wins. But here's the turn. While Microsoft was so busy defending its castle, entire revolutions were happening just outside the walls, and it seemed like the company was completely oblivious to the storm that was coming. I mean, take Internet Explorer. At one point, it had over 90% of the browser market, an absolute monopoly. But Microsoft saw it as just a feature of Windows, not a product in its own right. So they just let it stagnate. And that complacency opened the door wide for scrappy competitors like Firefox and then later Google's Chrome to come in and steal its crown. But the biggest miss of them all, by far, was the smartphone. This timeline right here tells such a painful story. Apple launches the iPhone in 2007, changes everything. Google's Android follows just a year later. And Microsoft, well, their Windows Phone doesn't even show up until 2010. They were catastrophically late to the single most important technology shift of the 21st century. And, it wasn't an isolated incident. You start to see a pattern here. In search, they poured billions into Bing, but it just could never touch Google. In mobile, Windows Phone had some cool ideas, but it just failed. And in music, their Zune player basically became a punchline when compared to Apple's iconic iPod. So, the public story was this weird mix of incredible success and just deeply embarrassing failure. But while all the headlines were focused on the missed opportunities, something else was happening. Something much, much more important for the company's future was brewing quietly in the background. So, what was this secret project? I mean, what was being built inside Microsoft that would ultimately save it from itself and lay the groundwork for its incredible comeback as a trillion-dollar company? The answer was the cloud. Now, cloud computing is a term we throw around all the time today, but back then, it was a pretty radical idea. Instead of running software on your own computer, you could access all this massive computing power over the internet. Microsoft saw this coming from a mile away and started making a huge long-term bet on it. And this shift to the cloud? It meant they had to completely reinvent their business model. They started moving from that old world of selling you a physical box with Office software inside to a new world of selling you a subscription, Office 365. That meant reoccurring revenue and software that worked across all your devices, not just your PC. And the engine powering all of this was a new platform called Azure, their answer to Amazon Web Services, which they launched in 2010. But this shift created some serious friction inside the company. You had the old guard, the whole Windows-first empire, fighting against this new cloud-first vision. This internal war just wasn't sustainable, and by the early 2010s, things really started to break. The breaking point came in a series of really high-profile stumbles. The crazy redesign of Windows 8 was met with a massive user backlash. Their first real attempt at hardware, the Surface tablet, struggled to sell. And their desperate multi-billion-dollar purchase of Nokia did absolutely nothing to save their mobile dreams. The old model was officially completely broken. A change was inevitable. So in February 2014, Steve Ballmer stepped down, and an internal candidate, a guy named Satya Nadella, who had been leading the company's cloud division, was named the new CEO. This, right here, was the turning point. And Nadella's mission was crystal clear from day one. In his very first email to employees, he laid out the new vision. The era of Windows First was over. From now on, Microsoft would be a cloud-first, mobile-first company. He wasn't just changing the strategy, he was changing the entire soul of Microsoft. Which kind of brings us back full circle to our main question. This whole turbulent period was defined by these incredible wins and these spectacular losses. So what was more important in shaping the Microsoft we see today? Was it the sheer dominance of Windows XP and the creation of Xbox? Or was it the painful, humbling failures in mobile and search that forced the company to bet its entire future on the cloud? Definitely something to think about.
Over the last decade, Microsoft pulled off what might be one of the greatest corporate comebacks in history. Seriously, they went from being this legacy tech giant that everyone was kind of writing off to an absolute cutting-edge powerhouse. So let's dive into this incredible story.
And that's really the big question we're tackling here, right? How on earth did the company that basically built its empire on Windows completely reinvent itself to dominate the next era of tech? Well, the answer is a total masterclass in strategy, culture, and frankly, betting big on the future.
To really get it, we need to rewind the clock. Let's go back to 2014.
Now, Microsoft was a giant, no doubt about it, but it was a giant that was stuck, a giant trapped in its own past. I mean, the whole world had gone mobile, right? Everyone had a smartphone. But Microsoft was still thinking in terms of desktop PCs. This Windows-first obsession meant they were missing huge shifts in the market. A lot of people really saw them as stagnant, kind of like a relic from a bygone era.
This slide really just lays it all out. The contrast is so stark. The old way was super rigid. Everything had to serve Windows. The new way, which was championed by their new CEO, Satya Nadella, was all about embracing the cloud and AI, no matter what device you were using.
So how did Nadella even begin to turn this massive ship around? Well, it all started with the fundamentals. First, you change the people and the culture, and then you change the product focus.
You know, before he touched a single piece of tech, Nadella went after Microsoft's internal culture, which was famously, well, toxic. He started preaching this shift from a know-it-all to a learn-it-all mindset. And this wasn't just talk. He completely overhauled their performance reviews, getting rid of something called stack ranking, which actually forced managers to fire a certain percentage of their team every year. The goal was simple: stop the internal competition and get everybody focused on one mission: creating value for customers.
So this was it. This was the crucial three-part plan right at the beginning. We've talked about the culture reset. Next up were two huge strategic bets: making their cloud platform, Azure, the #1 priority, and turning their cash cow, Office, into a modern subscription service. And when I say they went all in, I mean they went all in. Microsoft poured billions and billions of dollars into Azure, building data centers and tools just to compete head-on with the undisputed king of the market, Amazon Web Services. And you know what? By 2016, that bet had totally paid off. Azure was a serious contender. Okay, let's move into the next phase. Now that they had a new culture and a solid foundation in the cloud, Microsoft was finally ready to start expanding its empire through some really smart acquisitions. $26 billion. Just let that number sink in. That's what Microsoft paid for LinkedIn back in 2016. It was this massive signal to the entire world that the new Microsoft was not afraid to spend big to expand its reach way beyond its traditional software roots.
And this is where you can see that ecosystem strategy really come to life. LinkedIn brought in this incredible amount of data from the professional world, a huge asset for their enterprise software. Then buying GitHub, which is basically the home for open source code, was a stunning move for a company that once called open source a cancer. It totally solidified their relationship with developers. And in gaming, they shifted from just selling consoles to building a massive content and subscription service.
And this was a huge, huge shift. With Xbox Game Pass, Microsoft basically changed the rules of the game for the entire industry, pushing it towards a Netflix for games kind of model. Gaming wasn't just a side project anymore, it was now a central pillar of the company's future. All right, now for the final phase. This is where all those earlier investments in culture and the cloud really start to pay off in a big way. And it all culminates in Microsoft becoming a leader in the AI revolution. Just take a look at this. After years of relentless, non-stop investment, Azure's market share grew so much that it was seriously challenging AWS for that top spot in the cloud computing wars. This dominance in the cloud became the launchpad for literally everything that came next. And then came the masterstroke. By investing a ton of money in OpenAI, the creators of GPT, Microsoft basically secured a front-row seat to the generative AI explosion. And that massive Azure cloud they had built, well, it was the perfect infrastructure to train and run these new, incredibly power-hungry AI models. This let them weave this groundbreaking tech into their entire product line. The result is pretty clear. This chart really shows you their new spheres of influence. Microsoft isn't just the Windows company anymore, not by a long shot. It's this diversified tech giant, a powerhouse in cloud, in AI, in gaming, and in professional networks. The transformation was complete. So, when you boil it all down, what was the actual blueprint for this trillion-dollar turnaround? It really comes down to just a few key shifts. I mean, the transformation is just striking when you see it side by side like this. The culture went from being insular and competitive to innovative and collaborative. The strategy shifted from defending the desktop to absolutely conquering the cloud and AI. And the financial result? A valuation that soared into the trillions. It's just incredible.
This quote really just captures the essence of their success perfectly. It wasn't about one single product. It was a fundamental change in mindset. being adaptable enough to change, having the foresight to see what was coming next, and, most importantly, actually executing on that vision.
And that really just leaves us with one final thought. Microsoft brilliantly navigated the massive shifts to cloud and AI. But, technology never ever stands still. So the big question now is, having reinvented itself once so successfully, can it do it all over again to win whatever revolution comes next?